Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on my channel and joining me. Welcome to the journey home. My name is Catherine and I live in Nova Scotia. This is a select chapter from a book by Alberto Villoldo, PhD, Courageous Dreaming, How Shamans Dreamed the World into Being. And this particular chapter, very good, about practicing truth, the discipline of practicing truth. The discipline we're going to focus on in the next several pages is one of the great teachings of the Earth Keepers. It states that when we practice truth, everything we speak becomes true. Whatever we say comes to pass because our word is golden. When we don't practice it, everything we say and do becomes a lie. The practice of truth requires vigilance, honesty, and acceptance of ourselves and others. It begins with mindfulness, as well as not pretending that little acts of cowardice are unimportant. When we're not mindful, we're sleepwalking. When we are, we notice that something isn't sitting right with us, which opens us up to ask truth-eliciting questions such as, why am I so uncomfortable? What thought is making me unhappy? And what unsettling feeling am I experiencing? There are also a few core practices within the discipline of truth, including those of non-judgment and transparency, that helps us to understand how little control we actually have of our lives. That spirit is always in charge. Whenever you're hiding from an uncomfortable truth, life will draw your attention to it by providing you with situations that challenge you to stop the charade. If you choose to ignore these signals, your body may very well give you a wake-up call. A story created when you avoided a painful realization will become buried in your subconscious and imprinted in your LEF. Eventually, it will manifest its energies as a physical ailment. LEF meaning light energy frequency. We can avoid this fate if we consciously choose to rewrite the stories we've created. Every illness we suffer is a potential reminder to edit our tales and rise to a higher level of consciousness. Then we discover that there's a spiritual solution to every problem we face, since at the level of ego and spirit, all ailments turn into opportunities for learning. If you're scared or angry, you'll find that you can experience these emotions in a very physical way. Your heart rate and muscle tension will increase. Your breathing will become shallow. Your palms might become sweaty. You may even tremble with rage or fear. Such physiological experiences are part of the primitive, instinctual fight or flight response, which is meant to give you the energy to battle a dangerous foe or flee a situation before you're harmed. In the modern world, however, the jaguar mind has convinced us that any threat we perceive is highly dangerous. Ancient people experienced the urge to defend themselves or run away when a cave bear came barreling toward them. We experience it when someone tells us we're irresponsible and incompetent, or when the person we're dating says, I think we should see other people. Practicing truth rarely requires us to face down a cave bear, but it can certainly feel that way. If someone looks at you a little too long, and you're sure that he or she is disapproving of you, it can be difficult to refrain from acting out old stories. After all, you feel like you're under attack and really want to lash out at this individual. But you can learn to pay attention to your body's response to the perceived threats and choose to change your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. When your fight or flight response becomes locked in the on position, you live in fear and perceive everything with the eyes of jaguar. Your terror keeps you from practicing truth, which requires a discipline of fearlessness and the development of ego consciousness. However, the regular exercise of certain habits, such as slow breathing, walking out of a room during a heated argument in order to regroup, or consciously creating reflective thoughts, such as, I wonder why I'm feeling threatened right now, can help dial down the need to attack or run, thus pulling you out of reactive jaguar consciousness. In the Amazon, they refer to this practice as bringing the jaguar down from the tree, because when our jaguar mind has been frightened, it behaves like a cat perched on high branches, hissing at anyone who comes near. While the shamans have energetic practices for resetting the fight or flight response back to the neutral position, we can accomplish the same thing through the practice of mindfulness. Embrace non-judgment and transparency. Once we're vigilant about how we're acting in a given situation, we can let go of stories that lock us into judgments, such as, I must be unlovable if I can behave so badly, or she's not a good person if she could act that way or toward me. We recognize that there are certain ugly situations that cause people pain, but we can just conclude that they're awful without rushing to judge the victims, rescuers, and bullies. Practicing non-judgment allows us to see the larger picture, including the bully's fear, which is driving her aggressive, offensive behavior. The victim's lack of courage, along with his complicity of maintaining the situation. And the rescuer's focus on himself and his need to be the righteous hero. Practicing truth means slowing down, stepping back, and looking at a situation from all angles to get a better understanding of all that's happening without having the view clouded by personal assumptions. In Judaism and early Christianity, there's a sin known as lashon hora, which refers to engaging in gossip. According to lashon hora, speaking negatively about someone is of no constructive purpose, is equivalent to cursing them. And listening in on gossip is as bad as spreading it yourself because you're actively participating in it. But according to Jewish law, you must tell the truth about someone, even if it happens to be ugly or painful, to prevent an innocent person from being harmed. In that case, it's important to speak the facts only, without judgment, as that can only be dispensed by God. If you aren't going to prevent another person from being harmed, it's best to remain silent and not speak poorly about anyone, regardless of how great the temptation is. Once you see the larger picture, and remember that everyone has his or her own journey of spiritual maturation, it's easier to let go of the need to judge everyone and everything. Then you can practice truth and be who you really are, true to your values, and operating with integrity and courage. Similarly, the practice of transparency means allowing yourself to be seen by others for who you are, having nothing to hide. To that end, not long ago, I was watching a news program in which a political pundit was being confronted by a caller who was pleading with her to tone down her notoriously caustic remarks about a political foe. While the expert interrupted the caller with sarcastic comments, she hid behind large sunglasses, flipped her hair constantly, and aggressively tried to change the subject for all her attempts to appear nonchalant. Her body language and efforts to deflect the criticism left no doubt that she was feeling insecure and exposed. It's curious, but the more we try to hide our flaws and insecurity, the more visible we are to others. Sorry, guys. We'd like to believe that we can put on a good enough act to fool anyone, including ourselves, but we fail miserably and suffer even more as we continue to deceive ourselves. With courage, you can practice transparency. You can give up your attempts to look powerful, influential, humble, or wise. You can simply be who you are, with no veneers hiding the real you from the rest of the world. Part the curtains. Let reality shine through, and be as unashamed of your failings and weaknesses as you are of your strength and power. You don't have to fear letting people see your humanity, because like everyone else, you can't help acting foolishly, greedy, selfish, insensitive, or scared at times. But becoming transparent also means allowing your beauty and courage to shine and be seen by others. If you practice this, you'll no longer need to scurry about trying to protect your reputation or create status and security in the material world. You'll accept yourself right now, in this moment, and let your own beauty shine, allowing your elegance and grace to inspire others to find their beauty. The moment you stop hiding from yourself is the moment you step into the flow of creativity, where you can choose to think, act, and feel differently. And you can be reborn and redeemed in that very instant. You don't need to keep whipping yourself, hoping for redemption from some God on high. For the second you no longer conceal anything from yourself, you clear your toxic thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That's not to say you don't have to make amends. It just means that you begin the process of redemption and rebirth. The moment that you begin the process of redemption and rebirth, is the moment you allow yourself to be seen, regardless of what your story is. Your actions are already in the past, so you can move on and change the way you're operating right now. Then you'll find the courage and impetus to clean up and any damage that you've done. Practicing transparency requires that you draw on your highest levels of courage and dream from the level of the soul. But if you're to practice truth, you must recognize and accept that everything you've created around you is a mirage. Reject the illusion of safety and control. All that we experience around us and have made for ourselves, our power and status, our belief that we're living daringly, creatively, and our sense of safety, are lies. We've created it all so that we can feel in control of the nightmare. Our entire existence, in fact, is a story based on our need to produce and foster the myth that we're safe and in control of our lives at all times. We want to believe that we have security in this world and are the masters of our fate, but that's simply not the case. Every one of us is part of the flowing river of life, carried along wherever spirit chooses to take us. We work with spirit to move the waters this way or that, and we're in charge of how we perceive ourselves and our world. But spirit's will is holding the reins when it comes to the facts of our lives. We buy into our illusion of control in order to quell the fears. We experience that serpent and jaguar, but we're never fooled for long. The universe provides plenty of reminders that none of us is truly in charge, no matter what we do. For example, I choose to eat healthy foods, exercise daily, and meditate, but I recognize that even if I take all sorts of precautions, I still don't have the power to ensure that I'll never experience any health problems. Even those of us who could be called health nuts can end up with cancer, heart disease, multiple sclerosis, and other ailments. And of course, accidents happen too. The same is true for opportunity, which knocks on our door at the oddest times. At the same time, we must understand that it's not functional to let fears out about what might happen prevent us from making good decisions about our health and safety in the physical world. We can't let the fact that we have a finite number of days left on this earth overwhelm and paralyze us. After all, if we do, we'll be so terrified that we'll refuse to walk outside or take any risks whatsoever. To live daringly and creatively, to courageously dream, doesn't require us to give up sensible habits or our health insurance. It does require that we be aware that in life there are always matters that are out of our control. There's no relationship insurance, for instance, and the truth is that love sometimes ends, but we need to be open to it anyway. Likewise, there's no shame insurance, but we still need to speak our truth regardless of whether someone might ridicule us. If we tell ourselves that we can micromanage our lives and avoid all sorrow or misfortune, we'll get stuck in lower levels of consciousness, desperately trying to build a fortress against disaster. Practicing truth means being willing to consider that everything we say and do is a lie, designed to perpetuate the nest we've built for ourselves in the physical world. Our social reputation, our marriage, our career, our house, our credit rating, and so on. The more strongly we hold on to our illusion of safety and control, the harder it is to access the creative well that's available to us. Once we let go of the notion that we're in control of our lives, we begin to understand that the hand of spirit has always been guiding us. But we've been simply unaware of this fact. Then we can turn the wheel over to the one who has always been in charge. This doesn't mean that we no longer need to steer our ship and trim sail, but rather that we don't have to fight the winds. Ultimately, like Jonah, we accept the spirit may want us in Nineveh, and we respond to our calling there. So often we tell, I don't know if any of you know the story of Jonah in Nineveh, but he was told to go there and he kept saying no. So he went through a whole bunch of trials, tribulations, right into the belly of a whale until he finally listened and went to Nineveh, which is where all his blessings resided for him. So often we tell ourselves lies about who we are so that we'll feel secure in our identity, thus not having to do the hard work of facing our failings. When we believe our own press releases, we're like the smoker who claims she doesn't really light up except for that post-dinner cigarette each day. And, well, the one before bed. And the pack she reaches for when she's really under stress. Which isn't all the time, so you can't really count those. We're like the fellow driving the car with the bumper sticker. Practice random acts of kindness, who cuts someone off to get into the parking space first. Accept who you are, laugh about your foibles, and follow others to see the real you rather than, I'm sorry guys, allow others to see the real you rather than presenting them with a smoke and mirrors act designed to trick them into believing that you're someone you're not. Don't allow and don't follow the example of an acquaintance of mine who's very wealthy and insists on telling everyone he meets, from waiters to cab drivers, who he is and whom he knows. He isn't comfortable when he's not in his story, so he hides his true self. Then there's another friend of mine, an exotic and beautiful single woman who doesn't believe in fear or dishonesty. When she's asked what she does for a living, she'll reply with a straight face, I'm in the hospitality industry. I'm cleaning houses right now. It's great fun to watch the looks on people's faces and to see men make feeble excuses for moving away from her at a party after she's made this revelation. Apparently, they don't want to date someone who's just a maid. When you practice truth, you're unconcerned about appearances and aren't afraid of being exposed. You recognize that rich man and housekeeper are just stories and aren't terribly useful ones for describing who you are today, since you're so much more than what you do or have accomplished. The moment you have the courage to look into the mirror and observe your reflection in all its beauty and ugliness is the moment in which that reflection begins to change. Practice truth through intellectual courage. You can't practice truth without having the intellectual courage to admit that you don't know it at all. A simple act of this type of courage might be admitting to a group of people that you haven't made up your mind on some political issue because you're still trying to learn more about the subject, and then not feeling embarrassed or ashamed if they look down on you because of your admission. In fact, ultimately, you must be brave enough to admit to yourself that you don't know anything other than a collection of facts. Truth, then, ceases to be a quest to find people who have the same spin on reality that you do, those individuals whom you can readily agree with. Instead, truth becomes a stance, a gesture that you bring into every moment and every engagement. You no longer seek truth, but you do bring it to every situation, no matter how uncomfortable it might be to do so. We live in a world where we're constantly exposed to spin doctors who tell us that we would think what we should think before we've had a moment to process the raw information. The media knows that we lack intellectual courage and want the false security of having a solid, defensible opinion right away. I once turned on a 24-hour news channel, for instance, and only saw an empty podium where a politician was about to show up and speak. Over this image, an expert eagerly pondered what could happen if the speaker said this, as opposed to that, as well as what may occur next week if someone else were to respond by saying such and such. The speculation grew increasingly absurd, while the camera betrayed the gap between the reality of nothing going on and the illusion that if we could just get enough of a handle on what might possibly take place in the future, we'd all feel better. It's unfortunate that so many individuals try to put others down by pulling out some obscure factoid that seemingly proves the superiority of their position. It's tempting to fall into this type of dishonest discourse in our own lives. We're quick to tell ourselves that we know the whole picture when we're usually missing some vital information or an important perspective. At our jobs and in our relationships, we never want to admit that we lack certain skills or need to polish others. Instead, we create excuses and become hostile and sarcastic so that the men and women in our lives are too intimidated to confront us. We use jargon so that we'll sound smarter than we are. We'll even team up with other people who are missing skills and feeling insecure just like we are, thus forming a united front against the one person who exhibits the intellectual courage to say, hey, You guys, I think we're screwing up here. This is exactly how we ended up with the military ordering $600 toilet seats or hospitals charging $12 for Band-Aids and ibuprofen. Practicing truth means being the first one to acknowledge that some new thinking needs to happen, to admit that I need to find out some more information or develop some skills before I can make a good decision. Practice truth through emotional and moral courage. Emotional and moral courage allows us to be honest about our real feelings and take responsibility for our actions in all our relationships. It demands that we love truthfully and vulnerably. When we don't practice this kind of courage, we become unrepentant hypocrites in denial of our dishonesty. And we become this way because admitting to the gap between our intentions and our behaviors can make us extremely uncomfortable. Here's an example from my own life. I used to live in a well-to-do suburb in the southeast where I met a couple who had lived in the area for generations. While their parents and grandparents had never accepted anyone who wasn't Caucasian, Christian, or Southern into their social world, this new generation had decided to be courageous, break out the old rules, break away, reach out to individuals whom their forebears would have rejected outright. However, they didn't actually want to dream into being a new, more inclusive country club and neighborhood. They just liked the sound of it. My wife and I got an invitation to dine at the club during dinner. Our new friends smiled broadly as they told us that there was normally a 5-year wait to become members, along with a $60,000 initiation fee. But they were willingly wait to waive both if we'd join. Naturally, I asked them why they were making such a generous offer, and they said it was because my wife was Jewish and I was Cuban. We were both light-skinned. This meant that we could help them show others that this country club was open to ethnic people without upsetting the other members too much by inviting, say, an African-American couple to join. My wife and I were completely stunned by this revelation. Clearly, our neighbors thought that their compromise was quite clever. However, the way we saw it, they were being hypocrites. Not being the country club type anyway, I decided to see how comfortable they would be with me as a fellow member and proceeded to tell them about working with shamans in the Amazon. Apparently, our so-called friends decided that my wife and I were just a bit too colorful to be a part of their social circle, and we were never offered an invitation to join them again. When we practice truth, we're not dipping a toe into the river, we're jumping into its rushing waters and getting ourselves sopping wet. There can be no timidity, no compromise, no halfway measures. If we try to practice truth just a little bit, we end up becoming hypocrites. It's getting harder to get away from hypocrisy these days. We may think that we have privacy or are invulnerable to small town gossip, but it's now a YouTube world where someone can catch our behavior on a cell phone and upload it for all the world to see in minutes. This makes it harder for any of us to live without integrity and continue to delude ourselves. Yet it's extraordinary to watch people on television adamantly denying something they said or did that's all over the internet and has been viewed by millions of people. It can actually be helpful to see ourselves on video because when we do, it's much harder to maintain the illusion that we aren't rigid, smug, or insecure. By the same token, we tend to have difficulty looking at pictures of ourselves because the images often contradict our impressions about how we appear. The extra weight, the wrinkles, the strained looks, and the body language that says I'm not happy are much harder to deny when we're observing ourselves in a photograph. We don't need mirrors, photos, and embarrassing YouTube videos to reflect your behavior back to you. Simply look at the evidence and listen to those who are dropping clues that you're not acting in sync with your intent. Be aware that you're doing what you're doing, whether it's driving you on the road or insisting, oh, no problem, I'm not mad, when you're secretly seething with resentment. Remember to live in integrity. As you can see, acting with emotional and moral courage means being true to your values. To live in integrity, you have to be clear on what those values are. Perhaps you were raised with a rigid set of rules about right and wrong and were quite shocked the first time you stepped out of your neighborhood or comfort zone and met someone with entirely different values. To illustrate what I mean, I'd like to tell you a story of when I was a young man exploring the Amazon. Some friends and I were hosted by a group of rainforest dwellers who provided us with a great feast, which we understood to be their way of thanking us for the gifts we'd brought them. One girl of about 12 was so gracious to one of my companions that even when he retired to his tent for the night, she kept stopping by, offering to come in and give him fresh water or anything else he might need. He became so unsettled by her continual attention that he finally went out, woke up the guide that we'd hired, and asked him, "What's going on? Why is this kid constantly trying to wait on me?" The guide spoke to some villagers and returned with the news that we'd just attended a wedding feast, and, surprise, the groom was my pal. My friend and I were in utter shock at the thought that by indulging in this feast, he accidentally married this girl. We packed up in the middle of the night and rushed our group out of there. Afterward, we felt so bad by for the humiliation we must have caused the poor girl that we paid for her to attend school at a nearby village. More than a decade later, I ran into her and discovered that she'd remarried, had borne several children, and was now a liaison between her people and outsiders, thanks to the language skills and education she'd received as a result of our support. In my world, marrying off a 12-year-old to a stranger was unthinkable, so it never dawned on me that by having this particular feast with the natives, my friends and I were agreeing to a marriage. Yet as an anthropologist, I also realized that every culture has values that it assumes are held by everyone else, and it can be tricky to interact with people who live by a very different set of rules. Therefore, when practicing truth, the aim is always to act in a way that's congruent with our values and respectful of others. To avoid the discomfort of discovering that our values are different from other people's, we often choose to stick with our own kind. It gives us comfort to live in a neighborhood where we can boldly state our opinion and know that no one we encounter will contradict us and express a different view. When our ideals are questioned, or we meet someone whom we find pleasant and kind, but who admits to having completely different ones, we experience shock and outrage. For example, we take for granted the value of democracy and believe that it's the best type of government for everyone in the world. And we're up in arms when a Middle Eastern country decides that it wants to live ruled by Islamic law. If we're honest with ourselves, we're challenged to question our own dogma. Yet we often resist experiencing this painful conflict, deciding instead to be true to the values we were raised with, even when we don't work for us. That's why the rule in our culture is never discuss politics or religion. It's easier not to have to wrestle with what we believe unconsciously, or face the fact that we're always in sync with people we love and care about. I remember once having dinner with the mythologist Joseph Campbell, and he shared over a glass of wine that what we call reality are only those myths that we have not quite seen through yet. However, to be emotionally and morally courageous, we need to set aside our personal truth, which is not always agreed upon by others, and practice universal truth. Practicing universal truth. There's a narcissistic notion in our culture that as long as we're in touch with our own truth and are speaking it, we have a certain level of nobility. We focus on our right to be honest, forgetting that everyone has a personal truth that's equally valuable or equally meaningless. Practicing personal truth is a poor substitute for practicing universal truth. Not only is the former not very creative, it also only serves to justify the story of a rescuer, bully, or victim. Every great spiritual tradition speaks about a universal truth that can be experienced by all, whether it's known as the perennial philosophy or the logos. A personal truth, on the other hand, is always a lie designed to justify the terror felt in the face of the mystery of creation. And my truth, if my truth is different from yours, it's because we're both latching on to a limited idea, making our own perspectives for the universal truth. The minute we become attached to our personal dogma, we start justifying it. And that's when we slip into the nightmare of disempowering stories. If we were to drop our personal truths, we'd stop judging others according to what works for us. The mummy wars would end, and we'd cease comparing our global footprints and complaining about how the other guy isn't doing his fair share to save the planet. Americans tend to respond to the charge that we're being wasteful or insensitive by pointing fingers at some other group or country who's more wasteful or insensitive than we are. Of course, we never point to anyone who's less wasteful or more sensitive than we are, since that would force us to be honest about our own failings. By griping about how much carbon China is putting into the atmosphere or how violent the terrorists are, we justify our own polluting, violent policies. Yet none of this contributes to a cleaner, safer world for anyone. Personal truth is rooted in jaguar consciousness, which keeps us focused on what we think is the truth, when it's only our perspective. In a relationship, a man might say, "You made a commitment to me, but didn't follow through and stay in the relationship, so you betrayed me." This justifies his perception that his partner is a bully who victimized him. She, on the other hand, might feel that she was disrespected and unappreciated in the relationship. So her truth is that she's the victim while he's the bully. The universal truth is that both partners are so caught up in their psychological karmic baggage that one of them chose to end the relationship. If they realized this higher truth, they'd be able to celebrate and thank each other for the lessons and the journey. A universal truth doesn't have strong emotions and judgments attached to it the way the personal truth does. The universal truth about global warming, for instance, is that human beings are taxing the planet en masse, so they need to curb the activities that contribute to killing the earth. The universal truth about peace is that human beings routinely engage in acts of emotional, verbal, and physical violence. When confronted, they often make excuses for themselves. The way to peace is through the practice of universal truth. It takes us out of the story of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and it helps us dream courageously and creatively instead of judging each other. But such truth can only be experienced and practiced through soul courage. Practice truth through soul courage. With soul courage, we're aware of every opportunity to express and create truth, and we seize upon it. Our truth expresses itself in our actions and words if we listen to what we say and the messages our body gives us. We'll notice that we've slipped into the lie and the nightmare. If you're courageously dreaming, you'll find that your language is active because courage is active. Describing yourself with pleasant adjectives such as caring or a spiritual, compassionate person is a way of avoiding the challenge or engaging in caring, spiritual, compassionate action. Similarly, just as any man can become a father, actual fathering is far more difficult to do. And being a lover is one thing, but courageously loving and acting lovingly toward your partner of 20 years is something else. Perhaps you've been caring, spiritual, and compassionate in the past and will be so in the future. But keep in mind that it's human nature to want to hang on to past laurels, regardless of whether they fit today. So confess to your desire to think of yourself as a good person, along with your habit of brushing aside the evidence that you're not behaving very well in the moment. Acknowledge the excuses you make for yourself and practice truth. When you dream courageously, your language will make it clear who's performing an action instead of complaining. Something ought to be done about that situation, you'll say. I ought to do something about that situation. I ought to dream up something better and start making it happen. With the enormous creativity and passion of the soul, you'll recognize what action to take and you'll step into your courage without hesitation. It takes moral and intellectual valor to admit when we're hiding behind words to avoid being honest, ethical, courageous, or creative, or when we're using language to script stories. In war, we talk about collateral damage to civilians, speaking of our freedom fighters and sharpshooters trying to defeat the other side's terrorists and snipers. Even the military has changed the name of its sniper school to sharpshooter school. A client of mine told me she realized that she'd finally gotten over her story of victimhood when she changed her answer to the question, "So what do you do?" Instead of beginning with, "I'm a single mother," and following with a description of her woes, she now said, "I'm working on my master's degree in creative writing and raising 2 children," focusing on the actions that she was taking in alignment with her intent. In other words, what you think you are. A single mother, an entrepreneur, a cancer patient. It's not necessarily a description of what you're doing today. You may be learning, exploring, healing, creating, or discovering. Break away from the simple labels you will fix yourself. Discover what you're doing and investigate if you'd rather try something different. Do be mindful that what you're doing is congruent with who you truly are. And don't forget humor. Humor can be a powerful tool for practicing truth because it makes it much easier to handle harsh facts about our lives and to see ourselves clearly. That's why in the Middle Ages, the court jester was the one person in the kingdom who could tell the king the uncomfortable truth. When we're able to laugh at ourselves, we're drawing upon our courage. Our willingness to poke fun at ourselves also inspires others to let go of their masks and practice truth. However cynical humor can also be used to avoid the truth. Practicing truth means valuing and respecting all people. Jokes that are meant to intimidate or hurt someone else lock you into a disempowering story of being a righteous bully. Jokes meant to reassure another or lift them up, on the other hand, are refreshing and disarming. Just as a side note, guys, I've come across this so many times in my life. People who post other people getting hurt and laughing. I have never understood that. And this man just said it beautifully. Jokes that are meant to intimidate or hurt someone else lock you into a disempowering story of being a righteous bully. Jokes meant to reassure another or lift them up, on the other hand, are refreshing and disarming. Laughter allows you to take the drama out of a situation and alleviates the sting of honesty. The legend of the laughing Buddha says that he achieved enlightenment by capturing venomous snakes and removing their fangs so that they could harm no one. Truth tempered by laughter heals. Humor lets you see that you've gotten stuck in the script for a bad movie or soap opera. It reminds that you can come up with something more empowering than, "I've just been betrayed by my best friend," or "My doctor gave me a grim prognosis and took away all my hope." With humor, you might see the glass is half full or even just a quarter full, because it connects you to a sense of optimism and positivity. Instead of being the lone cowboy riding off into the sunset, you become one of those who has risen from the ashes of a relationship or conquered the fear of death and loss, remarking, "This is going to make a great story when it's all over," or "I feel like we're in the world's worst reality show here." Allows you to laugh along with everyone else in the lifeboat. It also reminds you that the facts of any situation that are always changing. So as soon as you alter the way you see these facts, you begin to change reality. Even in the darkest situations, humor that expresses your ability to dream a better world brings in the light. Laughter helps repair our bodies of tensions, wear and tear, decreases levels of stress, hormone cortisol, protects our heart, and strengthens immunity. And there's no doubt that the universe itself has a sense of humor, and laughter is written into our DNA. In fact, the Hinduism, the sacred syllable Om, is said to be the sound of the universe laughing. Everyday life can be absurd, filled with evidence that the Creator has a sense of whimsy. As they say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Partners in practicing truth. Most of us have at least one person in our lives, often a family member or an old friend, who keeps us honest by refusing to go along with any of our delusions. We gripe about them, avoid them, threaten to end the relationship, and then find ourselves irresistibly drawn to interact with them. Ultimately, we have to admit that we're attracted to their company because they won't let us get away with our dishonesty. It can be painful when someone is too blunt with us, but most of us instinctively hold on to the person whom we can always count on to tell us when we're getting a big head, not being true to ourselves, or not acting in sync with what we say is our intent. Such a nudge can be very useful in helping you regularly practice the truth. You can always make the choice to train others to communicate with you in a more gentle way. But do value those individuals' honesty and have the courage to thank them for it. Too often, therapists collude in our disempowering stories and sweetly remind us of how trapped we are in the past, confirming, well, you know, you are an adult child of an alcoholic. So, of course, you're drawn to men who mistreat you. Good counselors, however, will also be the nudges, gently but firmly insisting that we practice truth, saying, I know that your father was an abusive alcoholic, and you've been drawn to men who mistreated you in the past, but there is the payoff here. In going out with someone you just met who told you flat out that he has problems, being loyal in relationships. The nudge will also remark, you're drinking again? I thought you said you gave it up. She's the young daughter who mirrors all your unresolved issues and blithely says, well, I don't see why I can't do it if you're not allowed to do it, challenging you to come up with a logical explanation for your pretense. In the following exercise, you'll get practice in letting go of avoidance behaviors and start to become your own nudge. Exercising, becoming your own nudge. We like to believe that we're true to our values at all times, but the fact is that most of us have betrayed our deepest principles mere seconds after self-righteously insisting that we'd never ever violate them. It's like the story of the scorpion and the turtle who meet at the edge of the river. The scorpion asked the turtle to take him across the water on his back. I would gladly do so, the turtle responded, but I know that you'll probably sting me. Scorpion says that of course he wouldn't, since he can't swim if he stung the turtle in the middle of the river. They'd both die. Turtle agrees, and this makes sense, and allows the scorpion to climb on his back. Halfway through the crossing, the scorpion stings him in the neck, and the stunned turtle cries, why did you do that? As they both begin to sink, the scorpion replies, it's my nature. Try to articulate your loftiest goals for yourself. Do you aspire to be a great healer and poverty in your lifetime, or use the music you create to convince countless people to see love all around them? Even if you realize that your ambition sounds grandiose, don't judge yourself. Allow yourself to be extravagant for the moment. Now ask yourself what your dream is, without all the ego-driven goals attached to it. Could it be that it's to work at healing others and yourself, or to do whatever you want to alleviate the suffering of impounded dogs in your neighborhood? Is your dream to express yourself through music and perhaps influence others to practice music themselves? Remember that your dream shouldn't be to teach an endpoint of mastery and power. It should be something you can accomplish today in a small moment. Close your eyes and imagine that what you might do to manifest that vision before you retire tonight. If you choose to make a long-term goal, such as booking a meditation retreat weekend for 6 months from now, or planning a vacation at an amusement park to spend some quality time with your children, that's fine. But break it down now. How can you meditate today before you go to bed? How can you spend quality time with your children today, even if it's on the phone, before they fall asleep? Now that you know what you want to do and you realize that your dream is fueled by the passion of your soul rather than the will of your ego, find a way to act courageously before the day ends. You might choose to speak an uncomfortable truth that serves to repair a relationship, or interact in a new way with someone in order to create a deeper sense of intimacy with them. Whatever your inventive and courageous act, do it now. Being mindful and non-judgmental and practicing universal truth are all necessary if you want to dream a better reality. They lay the foundation for the next Earth Keeper practice. Clean up your river. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. God bless. Bye for now.